Welcome to Daily Brief This Week. 5 days of remodeling industry intelligence distilled into what actually matters for your production schedule, your design conversations, and your margins. Here's what you need to know heading into next week.
A deal that isn't signed is not a deal. That is the thread running through everything from trade policy to retail earnings to remodeler sentiment over the past 7 days. And if you only remember one thing from this briefing, remember that averages and announcements were less useful this week than the details sitting underneath them. Welcome back. This is your weekly review of residential remodeling developments across the United States and Canada, built for production leaders, design leaders, and business owners who don't have time to read every housing report, earnings call, and trade policy update that crossed the wire this week. Here's what actually matters and what to do about it. If you zoom out, this week was not about one big shock. It was about 5 separate stories all pointing in the same direction. National numbers are masking real divergence by region, by project size, and by how close a headline actually is to being final. Trade policy looked resolved and wasn't. Retail earnings looked strong and were, but only in the categories that don't require a homeowner to write a big check. Remodeler sentiment looked healthy and mostly was, except for the part of the index that looks forward instead of backwards. If there's a mixed conditions theme to this week, it's that. Real activities, real caution, both true at once. First, the tariff standoff. At the start of the week, negotiators were describing a deal as close but unconfirmed, with softwood lumber pointedly left off the table for relief. By midweek, the tone hardened. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer publicly warned Canada against retaliation, and reporting suggested the two sides were still far apart on the details. Then, hours before Wednesday's deadline, President Trump paused the threatened 50% tariffs, posting that the two countries have a deal subject to the finalization of documents. Reported terms include expanded U.S. access on autos, steel, and aluminum, and Canadian commitments on agricultural and alcohol access. As of this recording, those documents are still not signed. The real deadline is 12:01 a.m. Eastern on Saturday, not Friday, as some of the looser Tuesday night headlines implied. What changed this week is the direction, from hardening to reprieve, but not the underlying uncertainty. And notably, softwood lumber still has no confirmed treatment in what has been reported. For production teams, this means treating Saturday, not this week's headlines, as the actual checkpoint and continuing to flag any open purchase order with Canadian lumber, steel, or aluminum content. For design teams, it means holding off on locking in Canadian source specifications until the lumber question specifically is answered. And for business owners, it means building the possibility of a last-minute reversal into cash flow and pricing conversations rather than treating Tuesday's deadline as the resolution. Secondly, the retailer earnings. Home Depot reported Tuesday its first release under the interim leadership since CEO Ted Decker began a medical leave, and beat expectations on bigger baskets, not more big ticket jobs. Lowe's followed Wednesday with sales up 8.3%, but comparable sales growth of just 0.2%, and confirmed the same pattern. Smaller repair and maintenance spending and pro and online channels are carrying growth, while larger discretionary remodels stay soft. Online comparable sales alone jumped nearly 16%. Now, Lowe's went a step further and trimmed the top end of its full-year guidance from $92 to $94 billion in sales range down to $92 billion flat, and moved comparable sales guidance from flat to up 2% down to simply flat. What's new here is confirmation. 2 bellwethers in 2 days telling the same story, plus a guidance cut that signals management doesn't expect a second half turnaround. For production, that argues for keeping crews flexible for smaller, faster jobs rather than betting the schedule on big renovations materializing. For design, it means the selling conversation for a full kitchen or whole house project needs more work right now than it did a year ago. Now, for business owners, it's a demand data point you can act on today, not a forecast to wait out. Third, remodeler sentiment itself. NAHB's second quarter remodeling market index came in at 61, solidly positive, and current conditions held steady at 70. But the future indicators component, remodelers' own read on what's coming, slipped 2 points to 52. That's a small move, but it's remodelers describing their own business, not a retailer or a government agency describing them. What it adds to the week is a confirmation from inside the industry of the same caution Lowe's just described from the demand side. Now, for business owners, that's a reason to pressure test your fourth quarter pipeline assumptions now rather than in October. Fourth, and this is the one piece of real good news this week, Canada's resale housing market. Home sales climbed for a fourth straight month in July. Inventory tightened to its lowest level so far this year, and prices posted their first month-over-month gain since last 2024. Buyers settling into homes in a tightening market are historically buyers who go on to renovate. If you do any business north of the border, that's a tailwind worth building into your outreach, even while the tariff story stays unresolved. What connects all four of these stories is that the headline and the detail kept disagreeing with each other. The deal reached needed the word subject to finalization attached to it. Earnings beat needed on smaller projects attached to it. Sentiment positive needed, but the forward component dropped attached to it. Only the Canadian housing data held up without an asterisk. And even there, the real signal isn't this month's sales number. It's what tighter inventory typically produces a few months downstream. If there's a discipline to take from this week, it's reading past the first sentence of every report that lands on your desk and asking your team to do the same before they act on a headline. Now, production teams, your job this week is a Saturday checkpoint, not a Wednesday one. Reconfirm Canadian material exposure again before the weekend because the deadline move and the paperwork still isn't done. Design teams, the data is telling you where the selling effort needs to go. Larger discretionary scopes are the soft spot in demand right now. So lean into phased or whole house framing that keeps big ideas moving without requiring one enormous upfront commitment. Business owners, hold two numbers next to each other this week. NAHB's current conditions at 70 and its future indicators at 52. That gap is your planning signal. Build Q4 assumptions off the second number, not just the first. Next week, watch for whether Canada-U.S. documents actually get signed before Saturday's deadline, and specifically whether softwood lumber shows up in the final terms. Watch Statistic Canada's Industrial Product and Raw Materials Price Index for July, due out today, for the first real read on Canadian input costs since the standoff began. And watch the U.S. jobs report due the first Friday of September for whether residential construction employment, which lost jobs in July even as the broader sector grew, turns back positive. Here's the question to bring into your next leadership meeting. Everything real this week happened in the fine print, not in the headline. Where in your business, your estimates, your specs, your pipeline reports, are you still making decisions off the headline instead of the fine print underneath it? That's this week's briefing, and we'll see you back here next Friday.
That's Daily Brief this week. Catch the daily updates all week long on Substack, and we'll see you back here next Friday.